happened, which so very often leads to a Jewish perpetrator. The Jewish philosophy is, how did Franz Seiler describe it the other day? It is an excuse to commit crimes. That's all it is. You put all your morals aside and you can do anything. That's the Jewish philosophy. And of course the other part of it, for the people who actually are Jewish and following the dictates of the Talmud, believe that they are better than everybody else, and they act accordingly, and we see the horror in the world that is generated by that insanity.
You must understand, the leading Bolsheviks who took over Russia were not Russians. They hated Russians. They hated Christians. Driven by ethnic hatred, they tortured and slaughtered millions of Russians without a shred of human remorse. The October Revolution was not what you call in America the Russian Revolution. It was an invasion and conquest over the Russian people. More of my countrymen suffered horrific crimes at the blood-stained hands than any people or nation ever suffered in the entirety of human history. It cannot be understated. Bolshevism was the greatest human slaughter of all time. The fact that most of the world is ignorant of this reality is proof that the global media itself is in the hands of the perpetrators. We cannot state that all Jews are Bolsheviks, but without Jews there would be no Bolshevism. For a Jew, nothing is more insulting than the truth. The blood-matted Jewish terrorists murdered 66 million in Russia from 1918 to 1957. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Nobel Prize-winning novelist, historian, and victim of Jewish Bolshevism. The Jewish Bolsheviks implemented a policy known as collectivization. By collectivization, they could take away the peasants' land in the name of the state. This was what Marx himself described as the essence of communism, to abolish private property. In early 1930, over 91% of the agricultural land was collectivized. The communists were taking every good from the peasants. All weapons of the civilians were also confiscated by the state.
He ordered NKVD to confiscate all grain, all food from these areas. By doing that, he knew he's condemning them to death.
Картошку, свеклу, эту самую капусту, соленая капуста в бочке, с бочкою. Куда забираешь, садить же нужно. Нужно посадочку, никто не собрать, и все.
During the periods of 1921 to 1922, 1932 to 1933, and 1946 to 1947, the Jewish Bolshevik regime deliberately mechanized 3 series of genocidal man-made famines aimed at starving farmers in Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia. Millions died a slow death, and people resorted to eating grass, and some even to cannibalism. This real Holocaust is today referred to as the Holodomor. Encyclopedia Britannica estimates around 8 million people, 5 million of them Ukrainian, were starved to death by the Stalin-Kaganovich famine alone, and the 3 Holodomor genocides together resulted in a death toll of 16.5 million. Russian historian Alexander Solzhenitsyn estimated that between 1917 to 1958, the Jewish Bolshevik regime managed to exterminate up towards 60 million Europeans, including victims of the forced collectivization, the hunger, large purges, expulsions, banishment, executions, and mass deaths at gulags. Industrial-scale murders like these are an essential part of communist theory. With these famines, Lenin, Stalin, Kaganovich, and all their Jewish agents destroyed any remaining resistance to the communists. An order from Lenin and Trotsky, the Red Terror was first announced by the Jew Yakov Sverdlov. Lenin stipulated that 3/4 of mankind may die if necessary, to ensure the other quarter for communism. Lenin even outlined the purpose for the famines by stating, destroying the peasant economy and driving the peasant from the country to the town, the famine creates a proletariat. Lenin also regarded Europeans as animals. It is precisely now, and only now, when in the starving regions people are eating human flesh and hundreds if not thousands of corpses are littering the roads, that we can, and therefore must, carry out the confiscation of church valuables with the most savage and merciless energy, not stopping short of crushing any resistance. He continued, the greater the number of representatives of the reactionary clergy and reactionary bourgeoisie we succeed in executing for this reason, the better. Leon Trotsky said, we must turn Russia into a desert populated by white Negroes, upon whom we shall impose a tyranny such as the most terrible Eastern despots never dreamt of. The only difference is that this will be a left-wing tyranny, not a right-wing tyranny. It will be a red tyranny, and not a white one. We mean the word red literally, because we shall shed such floods of blood as we will make all the human losses suffered in the capitalist wars pale by comparison. The biggest bankers across the ocean will work in the closest possible contact with us. If we win the revolution, we shall establish the power of Zionism upon the wreckage of the revolution's funeral. And we shall become a power before which the whole world will sink to its knees. We shall know what real power is, by means of terror and bloodbaths. We shall reduce the Russian intelligentsia to a state of complete stupefaction and idiocy, and to an animal existence. Mass arrest in the middle of the night, kidnapping, executions, and brutal tactics of torture took place. The communist plan was to use psychological warfare, torture, and terror to intimidate their white enemies into submission. Gendrich Yagoda was a Jewish secret police official who served as the director of the NKVD. A major Israeli publication, Ynet News, revealed the truth about Yagoda, saying, "We must not forget that some of the greatest mass murders of all time were Jewish." It goes on, Gendrich Yagoda was the greatest Jewish murderer of the 20th century. He is responsible for the deaths of at least 10 million people. The Jewish Checkout was a secret police force created through the NKVD, later KGB, on December 20, 1917, by the Jew Vladimir Lenin, and was consequently led by the Jew Felix Dzerzhinsky. Jews made up nearly 80% of the rank and file Cheka agents, reports Bruce Lincoln, an American professor of Russian history. The Cheka rounded up Christians and all those who did not support the Jewish Bolshevik government. The Cheka practiced torture methods including skinning victims alive, scalping, proning with barbed wire, crucifixion, hanging, stoning to death. Women and children were also victims of the terror. They would sometimes be tortured and raped before being shot. Children between the ages of 8 to 13 were imprisoned and executed. With hot irons, the Bolsheviks tortured those prisoners who were caught. Some victims were actually sliced to pieces, bit by bit, while others were branded with hot irons, their eyes poked out to induce unbearable pain. Burning coals were inserted into women's genitals. Often in view of victims' family members, prisoners were publicly hanged. communists in Kharkov placed their victims in a row and nailed their hands to a table, cut around their wrist with a knife, poured boiling water over the hands, and pulled off the skin. They poked out eyes, broke bones,